January 1945, dawn creeps over the sprawling city of Tokyo. The skyline is a patchwork of low wooden houses, factories, and the occasional glimmer of steel towers, all shrouded in the mist of early winter. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the faint hum of engines grows louder, slicing through the cold morning air. In the sky, sleek silver shapes cut through the clouds. P-51 Mustangs glinting in the first light. Their pilots grip their controls tightly, eyes scanning below for enemy fighters, for anything that could end their mission before it begins. Far beneath, Japanese lookouts glimpse the approaching silhouettes. A ripple of disbelief spreads across the airfields. These Americans, who they had long mocked, who they believed to be slow, predictable, and easily outmaneuvered, now cross into their skies with unmatched speed and grace. A sudden roar, a flash of wing tip, and the realization hits: the skies above Japan are no longer safe. The balance of power is shifting, and the mockery will soon turn to fear. By early 1944, the Pacific War had settled into a brutal rhythm of island hopping, strategic bombing, and relentless naval campaigns. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy had long relied on the skill and daring of their fighter pilots, most notably those flying the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, fast, highly maneuverable, and lightly armored. The Zero had dominated the skies of the early Pacific campaigns, earning a fearsome reputation among Allied pilots. Its pilots, trained in rigorous programs emphasizing dogfighting agility and discipline, believed in the invincibility of Japanese air power. From Pearl Harbor to the early battles over the Philippines and the Solomons, Japanese aviators had flown with confidence, often mocking the slower, heavier American aircraft they encountered. The United States, meanwhile, had suffered repeated setbacks in the early years of the war. American bombers B-17s and B-24s were vulnerable without effective long-range fighter escorts. Earlier fighters such as the P-38 Lightning and P-47 Thunderbolt provided partial protection, but their limited range left bombers exposed over the vast Pacific. Air combat over enemy territory was a deadly gamble. Missions demanded precision, bravery, and an acceptance of high casualties, yet behind the setbacks, the USAAF quietly transformed. Technological innovations, combined with improvements in pilot training, began to shift the balance. Long-range fighter design became a priority. The P-51 Mustang emerged as a game-changing aircraft, faster, more maneuverable than any American plane before it, with the unprecedented range to accompany bombers deep into enemy territory. Powered by the Merlin engine, the Mustang could reach speeds over 440 miles per hour, climb quickly, and engage in tight aerial combat. Its combination of speed, firepower, and endurance made it ideally suited for the vast distances of the Pacific theater. By mid-1944, American intelligence had begun to paint a worrying picture for Japanese planners. The Allies were not only producing planes in staggering numbers, but their pilots were becoming increasingly competent. Strategic bombing campaigns over the Mariana Islands and the Philippines were slowly eroding Japanese morale and infrastructure. Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka, once considered untouchable, were now within reach of American bombers, provided they could survive the fighter screens. Japanese air commanders, however, were slow to recognize the scale of the threat. Confidence in the Zero remained high, and reports of new American aircraft were often met with derision. A slow, clumsy machine, one officer reportedly remarked of the P-51 in early intelligence briefings. There was an underestimation not only of technology but also of the evolving tactics and endurance of American pilots. The early American focus on defensive bombing escorts and incremental tactical improvements seemed, from the Japanese perspective, a far cry from the audacity required to challenge their skies. By October 1944, the first P-51 Mustangs began arriving in the Pacific. Squadrons were stationed on the Mariana Islands, prepared to accompany B-9 bombers on their inaugural raids over Japan. American pilots had trained relentlessly for long-distance missions, simulating enemy intercepts, weather conditions, and fuel constraints. Every detail was planned: altitude profiles, rendezvous points, and engagement procedures. They were entering a theater where the Japanese had long assumed total aerial superiority, but the Mustangs, untested in this environment, represented a silent threat. The Japanese, for their part, continued routine patrols along the periphery of the home islands. Intelligence reports described occasional sightings of American aircraft, but the prevailing belief remained: no plane could sustain the combination of speed, maneuverability, and range that American engineers claimed. And even if such a machine existed, Japanese pilots trusted their experience and superior tactics would neutralize it. Mockery of American air power remained a cultural and operational norm, yet beneath this confidence lay cracks in the Japanese defensive strategy. Production bottlenecks limited the number of new fighters available. Experienced pilots had been lost in earlier campaigns, replaced by younger, less seasoned aviators. Training programs, once the envy of the world, struggled to keep pace with mounting losses. In theory, the skies above Japan were safe, but in practice, the balance was tilting, and few realized how quickly the situation could change. The stage was set. Two forces, each confident in its abilities, were poised to collide. On one side, the Japanese pilots, skilled and disciplined, ready to defend their homeland. On the other, the American Mustangs, fast, relentless, and unprecedented in their reach, ready to challenge the very notion of Japanese air supremacy. The first encounter, as dawn would reveal, would shatter assumptions and redefine the skies above Japan. By late 1944, the Pacific Theater had reached a critical phase. The U.S. had captured the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, creating air bases within striking distance of the Japanese home islands. From these bases, long-range B-29 superfortresses could reach Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka, but bombers alone were vulnerable. Without fighter protection, they were sitting ducks for the still formidable Japanese interceptors. The stage was set for the introduction of the P-51 Mustang, an aircraft designed to change the calculus of aerial warfare. The first P-51 squadrons arrived in the Pacific in October 1944. Their pilots, many veterans of the European theater, were quickly briefed on Pacific-specific challenges, longer flight distances, unpredictable weather, and differences in Japanese aircraft capabilities. Unlike European airspace, where engagements were relatively constrained, the Pacific offered vast expanses of ocean and the need for precise navigation over unfamiliar terrain. Fuel management was critical. A miscalculation could strand a Mustang far from its base, over enemy territory. On the Japanese side, reports of these new arrivals were initially met with skepticism. The Americans were known to exaggerate their capabilities, and the Japanese military had grown accustomed to dismissing overblown threats. Intelligence briefings labeled the Mustangs as potentially fast, but lightly armed and untested. The seasoned Zero pilots, confident in the agility and combat record of their aircraft, remained convinced that American machines could not compete in dogfights. There was a culture of mockery, a belief that these newcomers would falter under the rigors of actual combat, but the Americans had not arrived by chance. Extensive planning had gone into their deployment. Escort routes were mapped meticulously to maximize efficiency while minimizing exposure to Japanese defenses. Fighter groups trained in high-altitude interceptions, dive-bombing evasions, and coordinated squadron maneuvers. Each pilot knew their role: protect the bombers, engage enemy fighters decisively, and survive. The P-51's long range allowed the fighters to accompany bombers all the way to Japanese airspace, something the earlier P-38s and P-47s could not accomplish reliably. This extended reach meant the American strategy could now shift from cautious raids to sustained strikes over the Japanese homeland. Initial test flights over the fringes of Japanese airspace revealed the Mustang's superiority. Even without combat, Japanese radar stations and observation posts reported planes moving at speeds and altitudes that existing intercept protocols struggled to counter. Japanese pilots flying their Zeros began to notice the difference. The Mustangs could climb faster, turn tighter at high speeds, and, crucially, sustain long-range missions that their own aircraft could not match. Despite these early warnings, Japanese morale remained high. Veteran pilots reassured rookies that the Mustang was another American exaggeration and that skill would win the day. Yet cracks were beginning to form. New pilots, often inexperienced, were assigned to intercept missions over northern Honshu and Kyushu. They found themselves chasing silhouettes that seemed to appear out of nowhere, then vanish with incredible speed. Reports of these encounters filtered back to command, sometimes dismissed, sometimes noted as anomalies. Meanwhile, the Americans continued their preparation. Intelligence reports, aerial reconnaissance, and careful analysis of Japanese tactics allowed them to refine engagement strategies. Pilots trained in energy fighting, using altitude and speed to their advantage, countering the Zero's superior low-speed maneuverability. Squadrons coordinated using radio communication, forming overlapping protective screens around B-29 formations. The combination of planning, training, and advanced aircraft created a force capable of challenging Japanese air superiority in a way that had never been seen over their home islands. By early 1945, the pieces were in place. The Japanese, confident in their ability to repel any attack, were unaware of the scale of the threat approaching. The first missions of P-51s escorting B-29 bombers were scheduled for January. What was meant to be a routine raid would turn into the first decisive demonstration of the Mustang's dominance and the beginning of a psychological shock that would ripple through the Japanese Air Force. The arrogance of previous years, built on decades of perceived invincibility, was about to collide with reality. For decades, Japanese fighter pilots had been celebrated for their skill, daring, and unmatched aerial agility. From the early days of the Pacific War, they had dominated the skies with the Mitsubishi Zero. Young pilots were trained to trust their instincts, to outmaneuver heavier, slower allied aircraft, and to strike decisively. Confidence ran deep, almost to the point of arrogance. They mocked the American airmen, labeling them clumsy, inexperienced, and reliant on technology over skill. But when the P-51 Mustangs began crossing into Japanese airspace, that confidence faltered. Pilots reported seeing aircraft streaking through the sky at speeds they had never encountered. The clean, metallic lines of the Mustang contrasted sharply with the familiar silhouette of the Zero. In the first moments of contact, fear mixed with disbelief. A veteran pilot described the experience as like chasing shadows that bite back. The very techniques that had won them countless dogfights now seemed insufficient. What had been instinctual superiority was replaced by uncertainty. This human element, the shock, the questioning of one's own skill, was the first crack in the armor of Japanese air confidence. The Mustangs were not merely machines. They were a psychological weapon. By challenging the pilot's sense of invincibility, the Americans were rewriting the rules of engagement in the minds of their enemies. Before the arrival of the P-51s, Japanese air tactics relied on speed at low altitude, surprise attacks, and close-quarters dogfighting. The Zero excelled at turning tightly and climbing rapidly from sea level. American fighters, especially the early P-38s and P-47s, could match them only with careful coordination and defensive strategies. The P-51 changed that entirely. Its extended range allowed escort fighters to accompany bombers all the way to Japanese cities. Engagements no longer depended on fleeting opportunities near enemy airfields. Mustangs could control the altitude, dictate the distance, and strike with precision. Squadrons flew in overlapping formations, providing mutual protection and concentrating firepower where it mattered most. Japanese pilots, trained for close-range duels, were forced into situations they had not anticipated: high speed, long-distance chases with constant adjustments for altitude, speed, and positioning. The tactical balance had shifted. What had once been a defensive advantage for Japan, familiar skies and superior maneuverability, was now neutralized by the Mustang's combination of speed, range, and disciplined formation tactics. The P-51 Mustang represented a leap in aviation technology. Powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, it could reach speeds exceeding 440 miles per hour, outclimb almost any Japanese fighter, and sustain long-range missions previously impossible for Allied aircraft. Its 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns provided concentrated firepower, capable of downing the lighter, more agile Zeros before they could close the distance. The Japanese, by contrast, faced limitations. The Zero was lightly armored, designed for agility rather than survivability. Its range was impressive for its class, but nowhere near the Mustangs, as Japanese pilots realized the Mustangs could engage at higher altitudes and escape quickly. Their traditional advantages evaporated. Technological inferiority, once hidden behind pilot skill and experience, became glaringly apparent. This technological gap was more than numbers or speed. It was a psychological blow. Japanese crews understood that even with flawless execution, their aircraft could not match the Mustang in a straight fight. Every sortie over home islands now carried the silent threat of an enemy they could not outrun, outmaneuver, or outlast. Leadership on both sides played a decisive role. American commanders meticulously coordinated the deployment of Mustangs, aligning bomber escort missions with intelligence, reconnaissance, and pilot readiness. Each squadron understood its objectives, its limitations, and its advantages. Decisions were guided by data, training, and a clear understanding of enemy capabilities. Japanese leadership, on the other hand, faced a more difficult challenge. Many commanders underestimated the Mustang, dismissing reports of its superiority. Training programs had been strained by losses in earlier campaigns, leaving younger pilots to confront an unprecedented threat. Tactical doctrines that had worked for years were suddenly obsolete, and there was little time to adapt. Misjudgments at the command level meant that the first engagements were often reactive rather than preemptive. Compounding the psychological and tactical shock to Japanese pilots, the convergence of human fear, tactical disruption, technological superiority, and leadership miscalculations created a moment ripe for transformation. The sky above Japan was no longer a familiar battlefield. It had become a proving ground for a new era of aerial warfare. The first encounters with P-51 Mustangs sent shockwaves through the Japanese Air Force. Reports filtered back from airfields that pilots were returning shaken, aircraft damage, morale shaken. The mockery that had long defined Japanese perception of American airmen was replaced by uncertainty and fear. Young pilots, trained to trust in their agility and instinct, now found themselves outpaced, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. Accounts describe moments of hesitation in the cockpit, a Zero pilot spotting a Mustang approaching from above, calculating angles, and realizing escape was unlikely. These split-second decisions, once guided by confidence and experience, were now shadowed by doubt. Even seasoned veterans admitted that their traditional tactics, tight dogfights, surprise attacks, and altitude maneuvers were no longer sufficient. The psychological toll was immediate. Confidence faltered, hesitation crept in, and mistakes that would have been unthinkable in earlier battles began to occur. This fear extended beyond the pilots themselves. Ground crews, flight commanders, and strategic planners began reassessing previous assumptions about the invulnerability of Japanese airspace. The Mustang was more than a new plane. It was a symbol of changing times, a herald of American dominance that challenged both skill and morale, while the tactical and technological advantages of the P-51 were clear. The human dimension of aerial combat was stark. Japanese pilots faced not only the risk of death but also the grim reality of defending their homeland against an increasingly unstoppable force. For American pilots, the mission was equally harrowing: long flights over enemy territory. Knowing that any mechanical failure or miscalculation could be fatal, this angle highlights the shared humanity in warfare. Both sides were caught in a relentless machinery of strategy and technology. The Mustang enabled the Americans to extend their reach, but each sortie carried human consequences: the loss of life, the witnessing of destruction, and the moral weight of attacking cities and fellow humans. Pilots wrote letters home describing the terror and exhilaration, the narrow escapes, and the haunting images of downed aircraft. Technology might have been decisive, but it was human courage, skill, and endurance that executed it. The P-51 Mustang did more than outclass Japanese fighters. It forced a strategic rethink. The Japanese command realized that defending the home islands required more than superior numbers or experience. The Americans could now maintain sustained bombing campaigns with fighter protection, striking deeper more accurately, and more frequently than ever before. For Japanese strategy, the implications were profound. The Zero, once a symbol of air supremacy, was now part of a defensive system under immense pressure. Airfields became vulnerable, pilots stretched thin, and the ability to launch counterattacks diminished. The Mustang allowed the Americans to dictate the terms of engagement, where battles occurred, how long they lasted, and which forces were committed. This strategic flexibility was unprecedented over Japan and marked a turning point in the aerial campaign. The Japanese response to the Mustang was hampered by production limits, outdated tactics, and slow adaptation. Efforts to deploy faster aircraft, such as the Kawanishi and 1K Shiden, arrived too late to counter the early P-51 strikes effectively. Even these planes could not match the range, altitude, or combined tactical coordination of the Mustang squadrons, American engineers and commanders. By contrast, continuously improved tactics and adapted technology based on combat reports. Modifications to the P-51, including improved fuel capacity, armament optimization, and formation strategies, ensured that it maintained superiority over Japanese planes. This iterative adaptation highlighted a fundamental asymmetry. The Americans could leverage innovation rapidly, while the Japanese were constrained by resource shortages and rigid command structures. These angles converge on a single point. The Japanese Air Force was no longer in control. The combination of fear, technological inferiority, human cost, and strategic disadvantage set the stage for decisive confrontations. The Mustangs were not simply superior aircraft, they represented a shift in the entire aerial landscape of the Pacific War. The pilots who once mocked the Americans now faced an existential challenge. The first major dogfights over Japanese cities were imminent, and the stage was set for the climactic battles that would redefine the skies above the homeland. January 16, 1945, the first major mission of P-51 Mustangs escorting B-29 bombers unfolds over Tokyo. Dawn-light glints off the silver wings of the Mustangs as they form tight V-shaped formations, engines humming with controlled intensity. Pilots check instruments, scan the horizon, and adjust altitude, knowing that every maneuver could determine life or death. Beneath them, the sprawling city of Tokyo stretches endlessly. Smoke from earlier air raids mingles with the morning haze. Japanese radar and observation posts detect the incoming formations, triggering scramble alerts at nearby airfields. Veteran Zero pilots, confident in their agility and training, take off, believing they can intercept these Americans as they had so many opponents before. The first contact is instantaneous and shocking. The Mustangs, faster and higher than expected, dive with precision, intercepting Japanese fighters before they can reach the bombers. Zero's attempt to turn and engage, but the Mustang's superior climb rate and speed make close-range dogfighting nearly impossible. Within minutes, the first Japanese aircraft are downed, engines smoking, spiraling toward the ground. For the Japanese pilots, disbelief sets in. Techniques that had secured victories over B-17s and P-38s in the Pacific are ineffective here. The Mustangs do not merely fight. They control the engagement. High-speed maneuvers, coordinated wing formations, and relentless pursuit leave the Japanese scrambling to adapt. The psychological toll is immediate. Fear replaces arrogance, hesitation replaces decisiveness. American pilots report the same intensity. Eyes scan constantly, fingers grip controls, and the roar of engines drowns out the sounds of distant artillery. Each Mustang protects the bombers with precision, alternating altitude and speed to keep Japanese interceptors off balance. Communication between squadrons is constant. A pilot calling out a threat could redirect multiple aircraft in an instant. The aerial ballet is precise, calculated, and lethal. In less than 30 minutes, the balance of power in the skies becomes apparent. Japanese fighters, once dominant, are in retreat or destroyed. Bombers proceed to their targets with far fewer losses than anticipated, dropping payloads on industrial zones that sustain Japan's war effort. The Mustangs, having escorted them, circle back toward the Marianas, still vigilant, still in control. The first skirmish is only the beginning. Over the following days, repeated missions continue this pattern. Japanese pilots face P-51s that appear at higher altitudes, strike with concentrated firepower, and retreat before the enemy can effectively respond. Dogfights become exercises in survival. Inexperienced pilots fall first, while veterans cling to evasive maneuvers that barely delay the inevitable. Reports from airfields detail the mounting psychological strain. Pilots refuse to fly missions, citing fear of the new American fighters. Morale plummets as losses accumulate. The Mustang's presence changes not only tactics but also perception. The once invincible Japanese Air Force is now vulnerable, reactive, and unprepared for sustained combat against a technologically superior enemy. Leadership decisions compound the effect. Japanese command orders intercepts that are poorly coordinated, leaving groups of Zeros isolated and exposed. American intelligence, conversely, adapts quickly. Mission debriefs identify weaknesses in enemy formation, allowing subsequent sorties to exploit gaps in defense with ruthless efficiency. Each encounter reinforces a grim reality. The P-51s dictate when, where, and how battles occur. By the end of January, the pattern is undeniable. Tokyo's airspace is no longer a safe haven. Industrial targets, previously considered protected by the limitations of American fighters, are now within reach. The Japanese response is reactionary, constrained by both morale and technological shortcomings. In less than a month, the psychological and tactical balance has shifted decisively. This first phase of Mustang dominance sets the stage for a broader campaign. It is no longer a question of occasional skirmishes or lucky engagements. The Americans have established a persistent, controllable presence in the skies over Japan. The turning point is clear. The once feared Japanese fighter pilots now face an opponent they cannot match in speed, range, or coordination. The skies above Japan have changed forever. The next wave of engagements will cement the Mustang's supremacy, pushing Japanese forces toward desperate, costly measures. The air campaign has reached its pivotal moment, where strategy, skill, and technology collide in a series of decisive encounters. The weeks following the first Mustang missions over Tokyo solidified a grim reality for the Japanese Air Force. By February 1945, P-51 Mustangs escorted virtually every B-29 bombing raid into the home islands, striking not only Tokyo but also Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe. Each sortie reinforced the lessons learned in the initial encounters. Speed, altitude, coordination, and firepower had shifted the balance decisively in favor of the Americans. Japanese pilots attempted to mount counterattacks. Groups of Zeros and a handful of newer fighters, like the Kawanishi and 1K Shiden, took to the skies in increasingly desperate efforts to intercept the Mustangs. But the results were consistently catastrophic. The Mustangs could dictate the terms of engagement, often diving from high altitude, striking in coordinated bursts, and disengaging before the enemy could effectively respond. One squadron of Shidens, despite a valiant effort to protect a B-9 formation over Osaka, lost more than half its aircraft within minutes. The psychological impact on the survivors was profound shock, disbelief, and the dawning realization that the old rules no longer applied. The human dimension of these battles cannot be understated. Pilots on both sides faced extreme conditions, bitter cold at high altitudes, long hours of vigilance, and the constant presence of death just feet away. Japanese pilots, trained to dominate the skies, now experienced fear at levels previously unknown to them. Reports from the front describe hesitation that would cost lives. Meanwhile, American pilots, though confident in their aircraft, carried the weight of responsibility for escorting bombers and completing missions over heavily defended targets. Every maneuver, every split-second decision had consequences that could mean life or death for dozens of men below and above. Tactically, the P-51s demonstrated unprecedented adaptability. They employed high-speed boom and zoom attacks, using altitude to gain kinetic advantage, then diving sharply to strike Japanese formations before climbing again. Their extended range allowed them to escort bombers far deeper into Japanese territory than any Allied fighter had before. The Mustang's presence forced Japanese commanders into reactive strategies, scrambling interceptors in ways that left them disorganized and vulnerable. Even the most seasoned Japanese pilots found themselves outmatched not only by the aircraft but by the coordination and discipline of the American formations. Technologically, the contrast was stark. The Mustang's combination of speed, firepower, and endurance revealed the obsolescence of the Zero in sustained high-altitude combat. Japanese attempts to innovate, deploying newer aircraft like the Shiden and modifying existing Zeros could not compensate for structural limitations and inadequate production capacity. Each mission highlighted the disparity. One well-executed Mustang sortie could neutralize multiple enemy fighters while ensuring the bombers reached their targets. Leadership played a decisive role as well. American commanders refined tactics based on real-time intelligence, analyzing previous sorties to anticipate Japanese maneuvers. Radio communication, formation discipline, and coordinated wing strategies amplified their advantage. Japanese command, in contrast, was hampered by rigid doctrine and declining morale. Decisions were delayed, counterattacks were poorly coordinated, and pilots often entered engagements with incomplete or outdated intelligence. The mismatch in planning and execution widened the gap between the two forces with each encounter. By March 1945, the results were undeniable. Japanese airfields reported mounting losses, some entire squadrons wiped out in single missions. Survivors described the Mustang as a predator they could not escape, its pilots skilled, disciplined, and relentless. American reports confirmed that bomber losses had dropped significantly under P-51 escort, while Japanese fighter casualties mounted with alarming speed. Industrial and psychological effects combined. Japan's ability to defend its skies was rapidly deteriorating, and confidence in the Zero's supremacy had evaporated. The turning point was complete. The P-51 Mustangs had established uncontested dominance over Japanese airspace. The days when Japanese pilots could mock their American counterparts were over. The skies were no longer theirs to control. They were a battlefield where the Americans dictated every engagement. Morale, tactics, and technology converged to make the Mustang the undisputed ruler of Japan's skies. This moment of supremacy set the stage for the aftermath: destruction of key industrial targets, shifts in Japanese strategy, and the broader implications for the Pacific War. The consequences of these decisive engagements would ripple far beyond the cockpit, reshaping the trajectory of the conflict and marking a permanent change in the balance of air power. The immediate consequences of the Mustang campaigns over Japan were stark and undeniable. Japanese fighter squadrons, once confident in their ability to defend the homeland, had suffered catastrophic losses. Entire units were decimated, with inexperienced pilots bearing the brunt of the attacks. Airfields that had previously been safe staging points now became hunting grounds, as P-51s patrolled relentlessly, striking with precision and then retreating before Japanese interceptors could respond. B-9 bombers, escorted by the Mustangs, began reaching industrial targets in Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka with far fewer losses than expected. Factories producing aircraft engines, munitions, and other war material were systematically targeted, disrupting production and creating cascading effects on Japanese military capabilities. Even minor disruptions delayed shipments of aircraft parts or raw materials, had amplified consequences in a war already strained by shortages and resource limitations. Reports from surviving Japanese pilots painted a grim picture. Veteran flyers, who had once regarded American airmen with contempt, now spoke of the Mustangs with cautious respect, acknowledging that the new aircraft had redefined the rules of aerial combat. Young pilots, many in their first year of combat, returned from sorties shaken, some refusing further missions. Confidence had given way to fear, hesitation replacing the instinctual decisiveness that had defined the Japanese Air Force for years. The psychological toll extended beyond the pilots. Commanders faced pressure from higher authorities to defend cities and strategic points, yet their options were increasingly limited. Scramble orders often resulted in incomplete formations facing fully coordinated Mustang squadrons. Intelligence reports documented increasing confusion and poor coordination among units, further compounding the operational difficulties. The Japanese leadership had misjudged the speed, reach, and effectiveness of the Mustang campaign, and they were paying the price in both aircraft and morale. American pilots, by contrast, reported a sense of controlled dominance. The P-51's performance validated months of planning and training. Mission debriefs detailed efficient escort maneuvers, successful bomber protection, and repeated engagements with minimal losses. Pilots described the exhilaration of outmaneuvering the enemy and witnessing the tangible effects of strategic bombing campaigns executed with precision. These early successes established patterns that would be repeated and refined throughout the coming months, ensuring continued air superiority. The broader strategic consequences were immediate. Japanese air defense capabilities were no longer sufficient to challenge the United States' growing dominance in the Pacific. The Mustang's presence allowed for sustained bombing campaigns, increasing pressure on cities and industrial centers. Resources were diverted from other fronts to replace lost aircraft and train new pilots, but production could not match losses. The psychological impact on Japanese society, already strained by war, was compounded by the knowledge that their skies were no longer secure. By the end of the first month of Mustang operations, the landscape of Japanese air power had been irrevocably altered. The Japanese could no longer assume control of their own skies. Morale, strategy, and operational effectiveness had all been eroded. In the span of a few weeks, the Americans had transformed the Pacific Air War, demonstrating the decisive combination of technology, training, and tactical execution. This immediate aftermath sets the stage for the longer-term consequences, the cumulative toll on Japanese air strategy, the erosion of industrial output, and the ultimate collapse of coordinated aerial defense. The next section will explore these broader, enduring effects, detailing how Mustang dominance reshaped Japan's ability to wage war from the air. By March 1945, the cumulative effect of P-51 Mustang operations over Japan was clear. Japanese air defenses were strained to the breaking point. Experienced pilots had been killed or reassigned, leaving less trained replacements to face an enemy they could neither outmaneuver nor outrun. Production of new fighters lagged behind losses, and the few advanced aircraft introduced, such as the Kawanishi Un-1K Shiden, could not counter the Mustang's combination of speed, firepower, and endurance. Industrial targets within Japan suffered significantly. Factories producing aircraft, engines, and munitions were systematically destroyed or severely damaged. Power lines, railways, and port facilities were also disrupted, further limiting Japan's ability to respond efficiently. Strategic bombing, previously hampered by limited escort coverage, now proceeded with far greater effectiveness. The Mustang's escort allowed the B-29 superfortresses to maintain pressure on Japan's industrial heartland with unprecedented consistency, accelerating the erosion of Japan's war-making capacity. The psychological consequences were equally profound. Pilots, commanders, and civilian observers alike recognized that the skies were no longer theirs. Letters and memoirs from Japanese airmen reflect a growing despair, a sense that technological superiority and tactical ingenuity had been outmatched by relentless American innovation. Confidence that had underpinned early wartime victories was replaced by fear and resignation. Even elite units, trained for aggressive offensive operations, were forced into defensive patterns, constantly reacting to American initiative rather than shaping the battles themselves. The Japanese military attempted countermeasures, dispersing aircraft to smaller, more concealed airfields, deploying kamikaze units, and prioritizing certain defensive sectors were among the strategies employed. Yet none could restore the balance of power. Each countermeasure was limited by fuel shortages, inadequate production, and the overwhelming operational reach of the Mustang-equipped USAAF, the fundamental asymmetry in technology. Tactics and command efficiency had already determined the outcome of air superiority for the Americans. The lessons were clear and immediately applicable. The Mustang's combination of range, speed, and firepower allowed not only bomber protection but also offensive operations that could penetrate deeper into Japanese territory than ever before. Pilots refined escort tactics, practiced high-altitude engagement strategies, and coordinated with intelligence units to exploit weaknesses in Japanese formations. The Mustangs became a force multiplier, transforming not only the air campaign but also the strategic calculations of Allied commanders. By late spring 1945, the cumulative impact was undeniable. Japan's air defense was effectively neutralized. The Mustang's presence facilitated devastating bombing raids with minimal losses, accelerated the degradation of industrial capacity, and psychologically undermined the Japanese command structure. Cities previously thought safe were no longer immune, and the Japanese military's ability to coordinate effective aerial responses had collapsed. This period marked a turning point not only in the Pacific Air War, but also in the broader trajectory of World War II. The P-51 Mustang, once just another fighter on paper, had reshaped the strategic landscape. Its dominance demonstrated how technology, training, and tactical coordination could decisively shift the balance of power. The aftermath of these operations would influence the planning of subsequent campaigns, the allocation of resources, and the ultimate conclusion of the war in the Pacific. The stage was now set for reflection. The story of the Mustang's conquest of Japan's skies was more than a narrative of machines and pilots. It was a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and the unforgiving calculus of modern warfare. The consequences extended beyond the immediate destruction, leaving an enduring legacy for strategy, technology, and the psychology of combat. The P-51 Mustang's conquest of Japan's skies was more than a military achievement. It was a moment that crystallized the transformative power of technology, training, and human determination in modern warfare. Pilots on both sides confronted extremes of fear, skill, and endurance, and the aircraft themselves became instruments not only of destruction but of psychological dominance. The Mustangs did not merely win battles. They shattered assumptions, exposing the vulnerability of a once invincible air force and redefining the rules of engagement in the Pacific. For Japanese pilots, the experience was humbling and harrowing. The arrogance of early victories, built on confidence in maneuverability and instinct, collided with the stark reality of superior machinery and disciplined coordination. Fear replaced mockery, hesitation replaced decisiveness, and the human cost of adaptation became immediate and undeniable. The sky, once their domain, became a proving ground where skill alone was insufficient against technological advantage and meticulous planning. From the American perspective, the Mustang's success was a testament to preparation, innovation, and strategy executed at scale. Years of development, pilot training, and tactical refinement converged to create an aircraft capable of projecting power across vast distances, protecting bombers, and dominating engagements that had once seemed uncertain. The psychological and operational effects extended far beyond the cockpit, influencing the broader strategic trajectory of the war. In the end, The story of the Mustangs over Japan is a reflection on the interplay of human courage, technological progress, and the unforgiving reality of warfare. It illustrates how innovation, combined with skill and determination, can overturn assumptions, redefine power, and leave a lasting impact on history. The skies above Japan, once a symbol of national pride and air superiority, became a testament to the relentless march of progress, the cost of miscalculation, and the profound consequences of confronting a foe prepared in every dimension: mind, machine, and strategy. The legacy of this campaign resonates beyond the Pacific theater. It serves as a reminder that in war, as in life, adaptability, preparation, and the courage to embrace new realities often determine the course of events. And the P-51 Mustang, streaking across the dawn-lit skies of Japan, became an enduring symbol of that truth.